Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. This week I'm going to go to my collection of blanks, and I'm going to go with a favorite of mine, and that is Spalted Birch. I just love the way Spalted Birch finishes up. It's just such a beautiful wood. It's not for everybody. Some people don't like the color patterns, but it's one of my favorites. Here I'm just marking the center with a jig to find the center. I think this piece is too heavy to use a woodworm screw, so I'm just going to find the center and then use that as a reference point to mount my faceplate onto the bowl. In this section of the video, I actually left the volume up. Usually I mute it when I'm turning, just because a lot of people watching the video don't want to hear it, but I thought it would be a good reference so you knew exactly what it sounded like. And it was also at real speed. Often as I'm turning, I will speed the playback up a bit so that the video is not quite so long. That section was in real time, in real volume. And you can see there how quickly I can get something from the state that I put it on the lathe to get it round. I can push, with the push cut, I can probably remove close to 1/4 to 1/2 inch at a time coming up the side of the bowl. So it doesn't take very long to get that initial shape that I want. Just off camera, I ended up changing the tenon a little bit, cutting it down, and I also turned a recess. So a recess with a tenon in the middle. The tenon is a lot stronger way to hold it. So here in this section of the video, I'm just refining the bottom, which is going to be a bit of a decorative rim just in front of the mortise, with a tenon inside, which will be later removed. Here I'm using my negative rake scraper. If you look at the bowl now, you can see that there's some pretty big ridges in it. At least they appear to be big while spinning here. Those are from my gouge. The gouge does remove a lot of material quickly, but it will leave some ridges. So the negative rake scraper does a good job at removing those and smoothing it out. Although you can see from the sawdust that's coming off, it's much finer, so it's not removing as much material as quickly as the bowl gouge does. Here I'm applying the Minwax sanding sealer. I don't always do this, but in this case I did have some end grain tear out, so the sanding sealer does help to stiffen those fibers up, which make them easier to sand. So if you have been following along, you'll notice that I got a new lathe. Runs much smoother. It makes it a bit easier to work, just because it does run a lot smoother. I've shaped the outside of this bowl. I've sanded it a little bit There's a tiny bit of tear out right here that I've got to get rid of. I'll finish that up. I also trued the tenon up on the bottom so that I can reverse chuck it. And then we'll apply the finish on the outside and then we'll flip it around. But it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful bowl. And one of the largest ones I've done to date as well. I don't know if you can see it or not, but here up near the rim I do have a small crack. So I'm just putting some CA glue in that crack, and that will strengthen it up and repair the crack. Here I'm just putting some ground coffee in it. The ground coffee is a very natural looking filler, and especially in this spalted wood, it looks just like the other dark stripes in the wood, and it fills it in quite well. You will see one of the things I should have done was been wearing a glove, so I did end up with some coffee and glue on my fingers. When you get super glue on your fingers, it's there until the skin falls off, or in my case, until I nibble it off. The disadvantage of working with coffee is you're going to taste the coffee when you nibble it off. So I'm getting ready to reverse this. I put a coat of sanding sealer on it, sanded it down, gotten rid of all the tear out. It's looking pretty good. I just need to power sand it up to about 400 and apply the finish. But before I do that, I want to put some glue on this tenon. I've had some bad luck with these spalted bowls gripping this tenon. And I think it's probably because of the spalting and the grain that's very pronounced running this way. I've had a couple now that have snapped off the tenon. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some CA glue and run it all the way around this tenon, especially down where it connects onto the bowl. And that'll just stiffen it up. And hopefully that will prevent any breakage on the tenon itself. I will, when I reverse it, you'll see, I will actually keep the live center up against it for a period of time until I get rid of some weight. Obviously, force on this tenon is determined by weight and speed, and if I get a catch, which I'll try and avoid. But until I get some weight removed, I'll try and keep the live center engaged as long as possible to just reduce the force on this tenon. And again, a tenon is going to be much more, it's going to be stronger than if I had have done a recess. So this is a recess here. So you can imagine on this, if I have my chucking expansion mode, but I find that will break this out fairly easily. Whereas a tenon, you're compressing it, and my experience has been that that's a lot stronger. And if I thought that this tenon wasn't going to hold, then my other option would be to put a glue block on it and then clean it up later, which I could still do, especially where the tenon is out here. I could glue up a glue block on it and clean that up easily. But for now, with this glue, I think the tenon will be fine. So now I want to mount my chuck on the bottom of the bowl. So I just put it up into place, just put it there loosely, then bring the tailstock up, which is aligned perfectly to the center, and then bring the tension up a little bit and then tighten up my chuck. This will make sure that I get it centered perfectly so that when I flip it around, I won't have to remove any more material. Just a short clip there with the volume turned on so that you can see that the bowl is turning quite smoothly. Now that I have it turned around, I'm just cleaning what will be the top or the opening of the bowl, and I'm using my carbide tool just to create the starting point, the opening into the bowl. It's easier to do that with the carbide than it is with the bowl gouge because initially the bowl gouge has nothing to ride against, and normally you want to ride up against the bevel. So the carbide tool is a good option for getting that starting point. Now that I have that rim established, I'll switch over to the bowl gouge. Again, you can tell by the shavings coming off, the bowl gouge is a little bit quicker at removing material than the carbide tool is. Just for reference, I sharpen my bowl gouge before I start turning, but sometimes even before I finish a bowl, I'll have to resharpen it again. Here I'm just showing you the jig I use so that when I go to my grinder, I can maintain the same angle all the time. This helps me get a nice sharp edge on my gouge and minimizes the amount of material that I have to remove when I sharpen. Hopefully you can see how much difference a sharp tool makes. I am cutting a lot more material a lot quicker now since I resharpened. The other thing you'll notice is I still have my tailstock engaged. Again, there's still quite a bit of weight here. So my goal is to maintain that tailstock as long as I possibly can, just so I don't put any extra stress on the tenon that I have inside the chuck. Now I have the tailstock removed. I just work away at removing the center that was underneath the tailstock, and then I'll start finishing the bowl, getting it down to a uniform thickness, and make sure that I have the right depth in the bottom of the bowl. One thing that's a little difficult is to remove that center nub right in the very bottom of the bowl. The reason for that is technically the very center of the bowl has no peripheral speed. As you go further out the bowl, it's going faster and faster, but when you get to the very center, technically it's not turning at all. The other thing you'll notice there a moment ago is I use my bowl gouge to determine the depth of my bowl. So I just use it, slide it between my fingers till it hits the bottom, line that up with the edge on the outside so that I can see how deep the bowl is. It's hard to tell by just using your fingers because I can't get inside the bottom of the bowl because that's inside the chuck. Now I'm using again my negative rake scraper just to clean up any ridges that may exist. At this point, the bowl is pretty smooth and I'm getting fairly uniform wall thickness now, so I'm getting close to the point where I'll be ready to start sanding. So I did not show the sanding, I did that off camera, but I did my normal, going from 80 grit up to 600. Here I'm going back to an original finish that I used to use, but it does work well. It's OB Shine Juice, which is a combination of shellac and boiled linseed oil and denatured alcohol. I found it works well on this. This surface is quite porous, and the wax friction polish that I normally use doesn't seem to penetrate as well and doesn't leave a smooth surface. So I do like this. And then after I finished with this shellac finish, then I also sprayed it with some spray lacquer. And that gave me a nice shine and gave me a nice smooth surface. So I've finished my bowl. I put my finish on it. As I mentioned, I've gone back to one that I've used before, and that's the OB Shine Juice, and I polished that up. But now I've got this tenon that I used initially, and I have to remove it. So what I've done is I put this block in my chuck, and you'll see it's rounded off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a non-slip pad in there, and I'm going to put the bowl up here. And this is going to be what's known as a friction drive. So for that, what I'm going to do So I'm going to bring my tailstock up. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but I still have the original hole where my live center was before. So if I bring that up and I put that in the same hole, then my bowl should be balanced pretty well. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on it, which is going to push that bowl up against this drive. So now when I turn that on, it should spin fairly centered just from the friction of this pushing up against it. And again, I don't think I've ever showed this before in any of my videos. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn the lathe on. And I spun it by hand there first, just to make sure that it's not going to fly off by doing that. Again, I've got pressure on it. We'll turn it up very slow to start. And just make sure that everything is balanced. And that's turning fairly well there. It's maybe a bit out of balance. So I can stop that there, take a little bit of pressure off of it, and try and balance it back out again. See if that helped. Oh, that made it worse. That's actually pretty good there. That's pretty good, because I'm not touching this surface anyways, so I don't have to worry about that as much. I just want to remove this tenon. So the important thing to know here is as I remove that tenon, what I want to do is make sure that all my force is this way. I don't want to come in with my gouge this way and put a lot of sideways pressure on this, because it wouldn't take a lot to knock that right off. But as long as I'm putting pressure this way, in this direction, axial, I'm pushing it up tight against what I have there anyways, then I should be able to go ahead and remove that tenon. So here's this week's video of the Spalted birch bowl. It turned out beautiful. There'll be some still shots here at the end. It turned out that it was 12 inches in diameter, and it's 5 inches tall. It's got beautiful markings. I know I've mentioned this before, but Spalted birch is probably one of my favorite woods. Not always a favorite to turn, but definitely the favorite end result. So I think it turned out very well, quite pleased with it. I did laser engrave my logo in the bottom, as you saw. It is a little hard to see just with everything else going on there, but it is readable. This bowl is for sale. And it's probably one of the bigger bowls I've done. So I started this on my old lathe, had some issues with that, and ended up getting a new lathe. And the new lathe will allow me to go even bigger than this. Again, this was 12 inches. My new lathe, I'll be able to do 18. But now I need to find some wood that's big enough to allow me to do that, because all the blanks that I have cut up are for 12 inch. But I'll get some, and we'll turn some bigger ones. But quite pleased with how this turned out. Please don't forget to leave a comment. Leave the word contest so you can be entered into the contest to win a bowl once I've reached 500 subscribers. I'm getting close. Each week I pick up a few more subscribers, so if you haven't already, please subscribe. And again, thank you for watching.